They thought they could bully me off my own land. 9 minutes later, I owned their entire waterfront operation and had the power to shut down their precious community forever. Sometimes the best revenge is buying your enemy's livelihood and watching them beg. Before you watch full story, comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. My name is Marcus Chin, and I'd spent 15 years building my tech company from a garage startup to a $50 million empire. When I finally sold it, I had one dream: buy a piece of paradise and live peacefully by the water. Willow Creek Ranch seemed perfect. 47 acres of pristine Texas hill country with a crystal-clear private lake, surrounded by the Willow Creek HOA community. The real estate agent assured me the HOA was very reasonable, and that my property rights were completely protected since my land predated the community by 30 years. I should have known better. The first sign of trouble came during closing. Patricia Blackwood, the HOA president, showed up uninvited with a thick folder of community guidelines. "Mr. Chin," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we're so excited to welcome you to our little slice of heaven. I just wanted to make sure you understand how we maintain our property values here." She was exactly what you'd expect from a Texas HOA president. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's cars, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "I appreciate the welcome," I replied carefully, "but I should mention that my property is private. It's not actually part of the HOA. Patricia's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh well, technically yes, but we like to think of ourselves as one big happy community. I'm sure you'll want to follow our guidelines anyway. For harmony's sake." I politely took her folder, already sensing this woman was going to be a problem. The guidelines were insane. No boats over 16 feet. No structures on the waterfront without HOA approval. No commercial activities on residential property. And buried on page 47, all watercraft must be approved by the Willow Creek Marina Committee before launching in community waters. Community waters? My lake wasn't community anything, I owned it entirely. For 6 months, I ignored Patricia and her ridiculous rules while I built my dream home. A beautiful modern house overlooking the lake, with a private dock for the surprise I'd been planning. A custom-built 38-foot houseboat that I'd commissioned from a master craftsman in Louisiana. The houseboat was my pride and joy. Handcrafted teak and mahogany, solar panels, a full kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a hot tub on the upper deck. It was a floating work of art that had cost me nearly $400,000. The day it arrived on a massive trailer, half the neighborhood came out to gawk. I could see Patricia standing on her deck across the lake, binoculars in hand, her face twisted with rage. That evening my phone rang. "Mr. Chin, this is Patricia Blackwood. We need to talk." "What can I do for you, Patricia?" "That thing you brought onto our lake violates 17 different community standards. It needs to be removed immediately." I took a deep breath. "Patricia, for the last time, this is my private lake on my private property. Your HOA has no jurisdiction here." "We'll see about that," she snapped and hung up. Patricia's first attack came through the county. Somehow she'd convinced them to send an inspector claiming my houseboat was an illegal dwelling that violated zoning laws. The inspector, a reasonable man named Jim Torres, walked my property and reviewed all my documents. "Mr. Chin, I don't see any violations here," he told me. "This is clearly a recreational vessel on private water. Mrs. Blackwood seems to have misrepresented the situation." But Patricia wasn't done. Next came the fire marshal, claiming my dock was a fire hazard. Then the environmental agency saying I was polluting the lake. Each time, the officials found no violations, and each time they left looking annoyed at having their time wasted. Patricia's tactics escalated. She organized concerned citizen patrols that would park on the public road bordering my property and take photos of my houseboat with telephoto lenses. She filed complaints with every government agency she could think of. She even tried to get the local newspaper to run a story about my floating eyesore. The final straw came on a beautiful Saturday morning in October. I was having coffee on my houseboat's deck, watching the sunrise paint the lake golden, when I heard the rumble of boat engines. 3 boats from the Willow Creek Marina were approaching my dock, Patricia's boat in the lead, followed by 2 others carrying what looked like official-looking men in suits. "Mr. Chin," Patricia called out as her boat pulled up to my dock. "You're in violation of multiple maritime regulations. These gentlemen are from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department." I set down my coffee and walked to the edge of my deck. "Gentlemen, I assume you have some kind of warrant or legal authority to board my private vessel on my private property?" The older of the 2 officials looked embarrassed. Sir, we received a complaint about an unregistered vessel operating in protected waters. But looking at your documentation and the property maps, it appears this is entirely within your private ownership. That's correct, I replied, handing him my property deed and the houseboat's registration. Mrs. Blackwood has been filing false complaints for months. Patricia's face turned red. This is a public waterway. That boat is a navigation hazard. Ma'am, the official said firmly, this is private property and private water. We have no jurisdiction here and you've wasted our time with a false report. That's a serious offense. As the officials left, Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. You think you're so smart with your money and your lawyers? She screamed from her boat. I've been running this community for 10 years. Nobody defies me. Nobody. Patricia, I said calmly, you might want to check who owns the marina you're so proud of. Her face went pale. What do you mean? I smiled. Have a good day, Patricia. That evening, Patricia organized an emergency HOA meeting. She'd spent the day calling every resident, spreading lies about how my houseboat was going to destroy property values and bring undesirable elements to their exclusive community. The community center was packed. Patricia stood at the front like a general rallying her troops. Friends, neighbors, we have a crisis, she declared dramatically. This outsider thinks he can ignore our community standards and turn our peaceful lake into his personal playground. We cannot allow this. The crowd murmured agreement. I sat quietly in the back waiting for my moment. I motioned that we take legal action to force the removal of this floating violation. Patricia continued. All in favor? Hands shot up around the room. These people didn't even know me, but Patricia had convinced them I was the enemy. Before you vote, I said, standing up, I'd like to share some information about your marina. Patricia glared at me. You have no right to speak here. You're not even an HOA member. Actually, I have every right to speak here. You see, as of 4:47 p.m. today, I became the majority owner of Willow Creek Marina Holdings, LLC. The room went dead silent. That's impossible, Patricia whispered. I pulled out my phone and showed the digital contract. The previous owners were very motivated to sell. Apparently, the marina has been losing money for 3 years, and they were facing bankruptcy. I offered them 30% above market value for a quick sale. Patricia's face had gone from red to white to green. You can't. Oh, but I can. And I did. Which means I now control all boat slips, all marina services, and all access to the lake for everyone in this community except myself. I looked around the room at the shocked faces. That includes fuel, boat storage, launch services, and dock maintenance. The implications hit the room like a bomb. Half these people had boats worth more than most people's houses, and they were all dependent on the marina. But the most interesting part, I continued, is this little clause in the marina's operating agreement with the county. It seems the marina has the right to restrict access to the lake for any boats based on safety or environmental concerns. Mrs. Henderson from Lakeshore Drive stood up shakily. You can't shut down the entire marina. Our boats are stored there. This is our livelihood. I don't want to shut anything down, I replied calmly. I want to be a good neighbor. But that's really up to all of you. Patricia was gripping her podium so hard her knuckles were white. This is extortion. No, Patricia, this is business. The same kind of business you've been trying to run on me for months, except I actually have the legal authority to do what I'm doing. I addressed the room again. Here's my proposal. The HOA formally acknowledges that my property is private and not subject to your rules. Mrs. Blackwood issues a public apology for the harassment and false complaints. And in return, I'll not only keep the marina operating, I'll invest $2 million in improvements and reduce slip fees by 20%. The room erupted in whispered conversations. I could see the math happening in their heads. Keep Patricia happy and lose their boats, or accept my reasonable terms and get a better marina deal than they'd ever had. And if we refuse? Asked Mr. Davidson, though he already knew the answer. Then I exercise my legal right as marina owner to shut down operations for a complete environmental and safety review. Could take months, maybe years. Your boats would need to be moved to Lake Travis, about 40 miles away. Hope you enjoy the commute. Patricia looked around the room desperately, but she could see the tide turning. These weren't her allies anymore, they were boat owners protecting their investments. All in favor of accepting Mr. Chen's proposal? Called out Mrs. Henderson. Every hand in the room went up except Patricia's. The next morning, I was enjoying breakfast on my houseboat deck when I heard a small boat approaching. Patricia was alone this time, her designer clothes replaced with simple jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. "Mr. Chin," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I come aboard?" I gestured to my dock. "Of course." She climbed onto my houseboat with none of her usual arrogance. For a moment she just stood there looking out at the lake. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "Not because the HOA voted for it but because I was wrong. I've been so focused on controlling everything that I forgot what community actually means." I poured her a cup of coffee. "What changed your mind?" "My husband," she admitted. "When I got home last night he told me he was embarrassed by my behavior. Said he'd been watching me turn into someone he didn't recognize. Then my daughter called from college and said her sorority sisters had seen the viral video of me screaming at you from the boat. She was mortified. I hadn't known about any viral video but I stayed quiet. I've been HOA president for 10 years, Patricia continued. I started with good intentions trying to protect our property values and maintain standards. But somewhere along the way it became about power. About control. About proving I was in charge." She looked directly at me for the first time. "You didn't just outmaneuver me yesterday. You showed me who I'd become. And I don't like that person." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, but saw only genuine remorse. "Apology accepted," I said. "But I have a condition." Her shoulders tensed. "What?" "Help me turn this marina into something the whole community can be proud of. Not as HOA president, but as someone who actually knows what people want. I'm a tech guy, not a marina operator. I could use someone with your organizational skills." Patricia looked stunned. "You want me to help you? After everything I did? I want the marina to succeed and I want this community to thrive. You know these people better than I do. You know what they need." For the first time since I'd met her, Patricia smiled genuinely. "You know, when I first heard you were moving here, I looked you up online. I read about your company, about how you started with nothing and built something amazing. I was actually excited to meet you. What changed?" "I was intimidated," she admitted. "Here was this successful, brilliant man moving into our little community. I was afraid you'd make the rest of us look small. So I tried to make you small first." I refilled her coffee cup. For what it's worth, I was never trying to change anything here. I just wanted a peaceful place to enjoy my retirement. "Can we start over?" Patricia asked. I extended my hand. "Hi, I'm Marcus Chin. I'm your new neighbor." She shook it with a laugh. "Patricia Blackwood. Welcome to the neighborhood." 6 months later, Willow Creek Marina was unrecognizable. Patricia had thrown herself into the renovation project with the same intensity she'd once used for HOA enforcement, except now it was channeled into something positive. We'd added a waterfront restaurant, expanded the boat storage, installed state-of-the-art fuel systems, and created a community sailing program for local kids. The marina went from losing money to being profitable within 3 months. But the biggest change was in the community itself. Without Patricia's iron-fisted rule, the HOA had relaxed into something actually pleasant. Neighbors talked to each other instead of filing complaints. Kids played in yards without fear of violations. People enjoyed their boats instead of worrying about regulations. Patricia had stepped down as HOA president and been elected to the marina board instead. She'd found her calling in business management and was talking about starting a consulting firm for marina operations. "Marcus," she said one evening as we reviewed the quarterly reports on my houseboat deck, "I need to ask you something." "Shoot. Did you really buy the marina just to get back at me? Or was this always part of some bigger plan?" I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunset paint the lake orange and pink. "Honestly, a little of both. When you first started harassing me, I did some research. I wanted to understand what I was dealing with. And I learned that you'd been terrorizing this community for years. The Hendersons almost moved because you fined them for their kids' chalk drawings. The Patels were afraid to have family barbecues because you complained about the noise. The Davidsons were selling their boat because you made marina access so complicated." Patricia winced. "I thought I was maintaining standards. You were maintaining fear." But when I dug deeper into the marina's finances, I saw an opportunity. This place has incredible potential. It just needed proper management and community support. "So you saw a chance to solve your HOA problem and make a good investment at the same time." "Exactly. And maybe teach a certain HOA president that cooperation works better than intimidation." Patricia laughed. "Mission accomplished. Though I think I learned more than you expected to teach." That was true. I'd bought the marina to neutralize Patricia's power over me, but I hadn't anticipated how much I'd enjoy the business side of things. Running a marina was like running a tech company, all about systems, efficiency, and customer satisfaction. There's something else, Patricia said. The other HOAs around the lake have been calling me. Apparently, our transformation has been noticed. They want to know how we went from the most complained about community to the most sought after. And what do you tell them? That it starts with leaders who serve the community instead of ruling it. And that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a neighborhood is getting a new neighbor who won't put up with the old nonsense. A year after the Great Marina purchase, I was hosting the annual Willow Creek Community Day on my houseboat. What had started as Patricia's idea for a community reconciliation event had become the highlight of the neighborhood calendar. Kids were jumping off the boat's lower deck while their parents relaxed on the upper deck. The marina restaurant had catered a feast, and someone had brought a sound system for dancing later. "Marcus," called out Jim Torres, the county inspector who'd been dragged into Patricia's war. "I wanted to thank you for what you've done here." "Thank me? For what?" "Do you know how many complaint calls we used to get from this neighborhood? Patricia alone was calling us twice a week with some new violation report." "No, nothing. It's like a completely different place." Mrs. Henderson overheard and joined the conversation. "It is a different place. My kids actually want to bring friends over now instead of being embarrassed by our crazy HOA." "Speaking of crazy," added Mr. Davidson, "did you hear about the Sunset Hills HOA? They're trying to ban swimming pools because they're safety hazards." Patricia's been consulting with some of the residents on how to fight back. I looked across the deck where Patricia was teaching a group of teenagers how to tie sailing knots. She discovered she had a natural talent for working with kids and had started volunteering with the local youth sailing program. "She's found her calling," I said. "We all have," Mrs. Henderson replied. "This community actually feels like a community now." That evening, after the last guests had left and the cleanup was done, Patricia and I sat on the deck sharing a beer and watching the stars reflect on the calm water. "Any regrets?" I asked. "About being a tyrant for 10 years? Plenty," she replied. "But not about how things turned out. I'm happier now than I've been in years. My marriage is better, my relationship with my daughter is better, even my health is better. Turns out that constantly being angry and controlling is exhausting." "What about the marina? Any second thoughts about working with the enemy?" Patricia laughed. "You were never the enemy, Marcus. I was my own worst enemy. You just helped me figure that out." She paused, watching a fish jump in the distance. "You know what the funny thing is? If I just welcomed you to the neighborhood with a casserole instead of a rule book, none of this drama would have happened." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But then you might never have discovered you're actually brilliant at business management. And I might never have found out how much I enjoy the marina business. Sometimes the best outcomes come from the worst beginnings." "Is that ancient Chinese wisdom?" "No, that's modern Texas wisdom. I'm learning a lot about this state." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the gentle lap of water against the boat and the distant sound of night birds. "Marcus," Patricia said eventually, "what's your next project? Because I've seen how your mind works and I know you're not content to just run a marina forever." I smiled. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. There are 43 HOA communities around this lake system. Most of them have the same problems this one used to have: power-hungry leaders, residents who are afraid to speak up, businesses that get caught in the middle. And I've been thinking about starting a consulting firm. Help communities transform themselves before they implode. Maybe prevent some of the drama we went through." Patricia's eyes lit up. "That's a fantastic idea. You'd need someone who understands HOA dynamics from the inside, someone who's seen how badly things can go wrong." "I'd need a partner who's been on both sides of the problem," I agreed. "Someone who knows how to organize people and manage complex projects." "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Chin?" "I'm offering you a partnership, Ms. Blackwood. Chin and Blackwood Community Solutions. What do you think?" Patricia stood up and extended her hand. "I think it's time to turn our biggest mistake into our greatest success." As we shook hands under the star-filled Texas sky, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here. A year ago, this woman had been my nemesis, trying to drive me away from my dream home. Now she was my business partner and, surprisingly, one of my closest friends. The houseboat that had started this whole war now served as our floating office, where we planned strategies to help other communities avoid the conflicts that had nearly torn this one apart. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. But sometimes it's even better than that. Sometimes the best revenge is turning your enemy into your ally and building something beautiful together. And as I looked out over the peaceful lake, with the marina lights twinkling in the distance and the sound of my neighbor's laughter still echoing in the night air, I knew we'd built something truly special here. The HOA had called the cops on my houseboat. 9 minutes later, I'd bought their marina. But a year later, we'd all bought something much more valuable. A real community built on cooperation instead of fear. And that was worth more than any revenge could ever be. 2 years later, Chin and Blackwood Community Solutions had helped transform 17 HOA communities across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. Our success rate was remarkable, not because we were miracle workers but because most HOA problems came from the same source. Leaders who'd forgotten they were supposed to serve their communities, not rule them. Patricia had become something of a legend in the community management world, speaking at conferences about the Great Houseboat War and how it had transformed her understanding of leadership. Her story resonated with HOA presidents everywhere who recognized themselves in her tale. As for me, I'd found something I hadn't expected when I bought my lakefront property. A second career that was even more fulfilling than my first. There's something deeply satisfying about helping people solve problems that seem impossible and watching communities heal from years of dysfunction. The Willow Creek Marina had become a model for community-centered business, featured in boating magazines and business journals. More importantly, it had become the heart of a neighborhood that people actually enjoyed living in. And my houseboat? It was still floating peacefully on my private lake, no longer a symbol of defiance but simply a beautiful home on the water. Though now it doubled as a mobile office when we consulted for lake communities across the region. On quiet evenings, I'd sit on the deck and remember that first morning when Patricia had screamed about my floating violation. Neither of us could have imagined then that her declaration of war would lead to the most rewarding partnership of our careers. Sometimes the best stories start with the worst conflicts. And sometimes the people who seem like your greatest enemies are just one conversation away from becoming your greatest allies. The lesson of Willow Creek wasn't about revenge or power or even buying marinas. It was about what happens when people choose cooperation over control, understanding over intimidation, and community over conquest. And that lesson was worth far more than the marina, the houseboat, or any amount of money I'd ever made. It was worth coming home to a place where neighbors were actually neighbors, where the lake was truly peaceful, and where the only thing floating on the water was my beautiful houseboat and the occasional family of ducks who'd made our cove their home. Patricia had been right about one thing. This really was a slice of heaven. It just took a small war to help everyone remember that paradise is something you build together, not something you enforce with rules.